So when I was 19 years old, I was in the surfing culture, and I went to Hawaii and met another teenager who had a 35-foot Choi Lee sloop, and he invited me to sail with him across the Pacific. I was supposed to go to college. I had to call my dad and say, please mail me my birth certificate so I can get a passport. And Dad set me free. He said, okay, you can do what you want to do, just like his dad did. His dad was a doctor, and he said, okay, if you don't want to go to college, you can spend that money on your sailboat. Well, Craig Fostvet, who I sailed with in 1971, when we were both 19, I mean. We were both teenagers, and we left Hawaii. I've stayed in touch with Craig, and he actually when he got back, he became a dentist, and he lived in Hawaii with a sailboat and was a dentist all his life. So I've tried to stay in touch with my formative sailing partners that helped me so much in life. But when I got back from sailing the South Pacific, I had the excitement to build my own boat. I knew I had to have my own boat and be captain of my own boat, because I had opportunities there in Auckland, New Zealand at that time to go on the first Greenpeace mission to Mururoa to protest the atom bomb tests that were happening in the South Pacific. I could have gotten on a multi-million-dollar yacht. I could have gotten on a major ocean racing yacht. And I said, no, none of that's for me. I want to go on my own spiritual voyages and learn about the sea and the cosmos. And so really when I started sailing, we went to interesting places, everything from Tonga to Fiji to New Zealand. But by then, I didn't really care about where I was. What I cared about was the boat and making the boat seaworthy and looking how I was going to make the next course. And back then in 71, we had to navigate with sextants. And I'm not a very mathematically minded person. I kind of avoided it in school, saying, no, I was never going to do that. I was more the artist type. So I started studying sextant navigation back then and looking over my captain's shoulders and doing it over and over again because I had to learn to use the sextant to be my own captain. And so when I caught a ship back to Mexico and hitchhiked across the USA to my family's beach cottage in North Carolina on the South Carolina border. And there was Granddad and Grandmom sitting in the rocking chairs on the porch. And I went to Granddad and said, I'm not going to college. I want to build my own boat to sail the world. Can I live here at the family beach house and build it here? And Granddad said yes, much to the consternation of my aunts and uncles and their families. But my dad was all behind it. He had built a plywood and fiberglass catamaran when I was a teenager. So the first boat I built was a James Warham catamaran, 26 feet long. And let me tell you, I felt the magic by then, and I knew that I was in touch with special things because when I was building the boat, every stroke of the plane was like a holy religious act. And I named the boat Tantra. And it so happened that the person in the South Pacific who had the biggest influence over me was Ivo van Locke, who was 24, and he had sailed for 3 years a 19-foot plywood boat with no motor, no radio, only navigating with the sextant, and he lived tied up alongside Bernard Moitessier when Bernard Moitessier finished his voyage back in that era. Bernard Moitessier was the first man to sail around the world. He went around the world in a half. Robin Knox Johnson got most of the credit within the sailing world, but Bernard Moitessier became a cult figure and influenced this ocean sailing Frenchman who really came to lead the world in ocean racing. So when Ivo came to North Carolina, I thought I was going to sail my boat down to the Caribbean. Ivo said, let's take it to Holland. I'm going home to see my family. And I said, sure. So that was a moment when I had a mentor in my life that gave me a boost in my whole sailing career. So Ivo and I sailed across the North Atlantic in 1973. First stop the Azores, second stop Portugal, on a 26-foot Warham catamaran that had no motor, no radio, no electricity, no life raft, no lights. But that sounds crazy now, but actually back then there were quite a number of sailors that were sailing this stripped down kind of boat only navigating with a sextant. So I did my first solo sailing back then when I was 21, and that was the first time that I started writing about how I was a spaceman at sea and how I could outsail the birds, how I could outfit myself and keep going. So I took off from Portugal down to southern Morocco. I had to go to Morocco because in the Azores we met these guys. They said, you got to go to Mogador, Morocco. That's where everyone goes. Jimi Hendrix was just there. He gave everyone LSD and did an air guitar concert. It's the most popular place. So you got to go there. So I was on my way to Mogador, Morocco, and navigating with the sextant out there, doing my calculations and drawing my lines on the chart, and it wasn't working out. I got lost. So I knew that if I turned left, I'd find the coast of Morocco, then I'd identify a lighthouse, and then I'd follow the coast down to Mogador, Morocco. I did that. And I waited for Evo to come. Evo got back, and Evo and I set off for the Canary Islands, the Cabo Verde Islands, and then we sailed from the Cabo Verde Islands south to Bahia, Brazil. And that was quite an amazing time for us. But we were headed for the Amazon River. So we spent a short time there, then we sailed the 1,800 miles up to the Amazon River, sailed into the Amazon River, and spent a year in the Amazon River. Evo's girlfriend came to see him, and they went further up the river, and I ended up sailing back. And Evo gave me his old World War I brass sextant and said, I don't know if you can use this without me, Reid, but I'm giving it to you. So I had my challenge when I sailed out of the Amazon River to figure out how to use the sextant. And when those lines started to come together and make little triangles on the chart, I knew I had it. I found my first landfall, which I wanted to landfall on something I could identify, the Paramaribo River in Suriname with a blinking light. Then I knew I had gotten to where I wanted to go, but I knew I was getting there anyway. And then I sailed up to the Barbados, and everyone had told me that you should go to Bequia in the Grenadines. And Bequia has the best boat building tradition in all the Caribbean, because New Bedford whalers jumped ship there some 100 or so years ago, and they built the finest boats and sailboats in all the Caribbean. And so I sailed there, and while I was there on my little catamaran, I met a bunch of really great people. It's a wonderful place. And I watched the Friendship Rose, which is a gaff rig schooner, sail in and out every day in every kind of weather. And anyone from Bequia or that area would look at that boat and say, that boat is a lot like the Friendship Rose, which was built in Bequia, and it's a gaff rig schooner, and it's even that color. So I sailed my catamaran from the Grenadines back home to North Carolina, where I built the boat, and I went to Granddad and Dad again, and I said, now I want to build a boat that can go anywhere in the world and do anything and stay there forever. And I rallied my whole family, and we were going to build a ferro cement boat, because back in the early 70s, I had helped in some boat yards, and I saw them building these ferro cement boats, and I understood how they did it. Building a wooden boat is very difficult. Building a steel boat is very difficult, but I saw how they could bend the steel by hand and put the wire on and then plaster it. So I was originally going to build a ferro cement boat, but the book I used, Bruce Bingham Boat Building, had a chapter on a product called Ferrolite, which is microballoons chopped matte, which you mix with polyester resin. And I had already become familiar with that because I built surfboards through high school, and the catamarans that I built and that my dad built. So we decided, let's see about this. So when we had just the basic form of the boat up, we went ahead and built the pilot house and put the cross-welded mesh on both sides, made it nice and smooth. And in the morning, we plastered the pilot house with fiberglass. It looked like cement. You push it through and you smooth it off, and you make sure there's no voids inside. Then we went back and had lunch on the porch overlooking the boat we were building. And I'm going to answer questions after. Yeah. And so we went back to the boat after lunch, and we got out our axe and sledgehammer, and we said, let's see about this material. And we slammed it with the sledgehammer and it bounced off. We slammed it with an axe. It made a little chip in the fiberglass. We slammed it again and we got a chip in the axe. It hit the steel inside and we said, this is too good. Let's build it out of this product. So that's what we did. So the boat is really steel and fiberglass, not cement. And I had the help of brothers and family and cousins. On weekends, sometimes we had 15 people helping work. So we built the boat in a year and a half and launched her ready to sail. And I was taking the boat back to Bequia in the Grenadines, where I knew I could refine her with the schooner sailors that were there and get real cheap tropical hardwood from Dominica that was blown down during Hurricane David. And so that's what we did. We got beautiful tropical hardwood, went to Bequia, we refined the rig of the boat. But when I launched the boat, I had a wood-burning fireplace in the pilot house because I knew I was going to Antarctica. I wanted to do the ultimate test and make the voyage to Antarctica. So we set off across the Pacific. No one wanted to go to Antarctica with me, not at all. People would sail across the Pacific with me. By the time I got to Fiji, they didn't even want to sail to New Zealand with me because it was cooler and they wanted to stay in the tropics. That crew jumped ship. I went into the Suva Fiji Yacht Club and put a notice up, who wants to sail to New Zealand? And I immediately got 4 crew members. But when we got to New Zealand, they didn't even want to think about Antarctica. They jumped ship. I was in Auckland, New Zealand. I put up the windsurfer sail between the 2 masts, and it said, Antarctic bound, exclamation point. And the very first day, I got a Canadian backpacker, and I grilled him. I said, you better be ready to die if you're going to come with me. And he said, yeah, I'm coming with you. I want to go. And I said, okay, get on board. If you can chip in, good. Now you got to help me with the boat. And the same day, a New Zealand tugboat driver drove a little tug by. He had a red beard and hair and a heavy accent and said, you're going to Antarctica? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm coming too. I'm going to see you after work. So that's how I got my crew. And I built a really great crew. And I was in Auckland, New Zealand in 1986. And I said, what can I do next whereby I will evolve? What can I do after Antarctica? Because there isn't really much more challenging sailing that I could see in exploring after Antarctica. And because I knew Bernard Moitessier, the longest trip in the world that he did, I said, I can do the longest trip in the world without stopping, without resupply. Why? Because I love it so much. That was why I wanted to do it. And I didn't see it as a challenge. I saw it as evolving to the place where I could naturally live at sea instead of on the land. So I said, how long will I go? Twice as long as him? 310 days? No, I'll go 3 times as long as him. I started to add the numbers in my head, and I suddenly saw a slot machine spinning, and I looked at it, and then it stopped on 1 and 3 zeros, 1,000 days. So we did the Antarctic expedition, and I had in mind the 1,000-day voyage. So it made the Antarctic voyage much easier. And on that voyage, I really learned about crew. Men and women, multinational, 5 nationalities. Only 1 man had been to sea before, and the rest of them had never even been to sea. But they helped me work on the boat, and they helped me haul out. And they were a tough and a great crew, and we did a really great job. And by the time I got back, all I could think about was, I'm going to do the longest sea voyage in history. I'm going to go 1,000 days nonstop. And when I do that, I'm going to depart the touch and the sight of the earth far longer than any human ever has, thereby leading the evolution of humanity off of this earth into the stars. That was what I realized back in 1987. But because I didn't have a real job, and I was looking for sponsors, and I was getting help left and right, all kinds of things. The biggest thing I got was donation of sails from Doyle Sails, and the most fine dock in New York City on West 23rd Street. The owner of that dock said, "You're the man. Here's your spot." And a guy with a white suit and gold pads on his shoulders came up and pointed at my boat and said, "I'll give you $3,000 a month for that spot where that schooner is." And the owner of the pier walked away from him. And then he left me there for 8 years. So he gave up hundreds of thousands of dollars for me to try to do the longest sea voyage in history. And I worked while I was there, and I did a lot of sailing and interesting voyages. I did 100 days out of sight of land. I said, why are all the racing boats getting sponsorship and I'm not? Don't they know the ancient wisdom of Aesop's fable, the turtle and the hare? And I said, I'm going to draw a sea turtle as big as the South Atlantic Ocean to remind the world of the ancient wisdom of Aesop's fable, to go slowly but surely instead of fast and brash. I looked at the winds and currents, drew my turtle on the South Atlantic, called the Associated Press. They came and did a big story. It went worldwide. And I invented GPS art at that time. And I went with one lady, and we spent 200 days doing that voyage. But still, I wasn't getting what I needed to do the 1,000-day voyage. So I kept working and I kept working. At first, I thought I was going to go with 3 couples. That would be very good. Everyone would have someone to love. There would be enough people to sail the schooner. But the years went by, and I realized that I wasn't going to get the people. There was no one in the sailing world who I met with massive stories in all the sailing magazines and in the press who wanted to go 1,000 days nonstop at sea. So pretty soon I realized it was just going to be me and hopefully one lady who would fall in love with me and want to go. Well, that did happen with one, and she was with me for 6 years, and we broke records and we sailed, and finally she said, Reid, we got to sell the boat. You're never going to go on the 1,000-day voyage. So we separated. Then I met another woman. She was great. She sailed with me for 6 years, and she said the same thing. She said, Reid, let's sell the boat and get a horse farm. And I said, well, no, you liked me because I'm a sailor. I'm going to keep sailing. Well, by about that time, then I met another beautiful lady that came to me and said, I'm ready to go with you. I'm ready to sail to eternity. And luckily that time I was closer to going. And so I set off with a beautiful lady and just the 2 of us on the 1,000-day voyage. And she was good. She did really great. And, well, she got pregnant by accident before we left. Well, she didn't like the birth control she was on. She wanted to switch to another one. Pretty soon things got mixed up. But she said, what happens if I have to get off? And I said, listen, I've been working on this for 20 years. Hundreds of people have helped me. I have sponsors. I've gotten tons of money. I've gotten tons of food donated. I can't stop no matter what. It's life or death for me. If you have to get off, I'm going to keep going because I have to, not knowing what would happen to her. So the 2 of us understood that. We were below South Africa, and I said, well, geez, what do we do now? Go back to South Africa? But I knew John Sanders. Does anyone know who John Sanders is? Hardly no one knows who he is. He's from Australia. Back in the early 80s, he went twice around the world without stopping, 420 days. So he beat Bernard's record. I didn't know about him. He beat Bernard's record, but the Guinness Book of World Records said, oh no, you stopped and got food in England. If you want the long record, you have to keep going without stopping. So John Sanders said, well, I'll show you. Well, back in the mid-'80s, he got 600 grand to fix his boat up from a real estate person in Perth. And he set off, and he went 650 days, and he sailed 3 times around the world, the bottom, in a really nice boat. And he is hardcore, tough sailor. So I was in touch with him. He's laughing at me going, you'll never break my record. You'll never break my record in this boat and all of that. But so I said, I'm sailing to Perth. John Sanders is going to come out and rescue my girlfriend so I can go on and beat his record. I had Iridium satellite telephone. I texted him, and he said, okay, I'm coming out off of Perth so you don't come into shore and you can keep your record. I'll come over in my rubber boat and pick her up. And so we sailed to Perth, and the night before we got there, we were in such a blow of wind that I heard some flapping, and I looked outside, and my giant mainsail had ripped right through the middle and right up the back, and there was this huge, so like my work was set for me after that. I was already doing little repairs on the sails, but so I dropped her off with John Sanders, and she went back to New York City to wait for me and have our baby. And we stayed in touch. The press hated me after that. The Associated Press said, my editor won't let me do any more stories on you because, you know, you kept going. So it was a real difficult time for me. And I was running out of water. The desalinator didn't break. And I knew the only place I could get water was if I sailed up to the equator, because there's doldrums and rainstorms at the equator. So I kept wondering, where am I going up to the equator? Because if I go up to the equator, I'm going to have to pass through the trade winds of the Pacific, always blowing from east to west, very strong, lots of islands. I said, I don't want to go up there. I'll have to sail back there. I thought of going across the North Atlantic. I said, oh no, too many ships. And then I heard about the garbage patch up there, 1,000 miles of garbage. And I said, no, I'm going to stay down here. So I sailed in the Southern Ocean until I got below Tahiti and passed up by the Easter Island. And I went up to the equator, and within a very short while, the rain came, and I drifted, and I caught my rain, and I filled up my water tanks, and I was going, this is pretty great. And I started sailing south again. Now, I told you that I invented GPS art, and I drew a sea turtle with my course. Well, a friend who was watching me sail, my course was satellite tracked by the Canadian company that tracked the Canadian fishing fleet. And my team of tech guys who ran my website were posting where I was every day. So one of my friends wrote me and said, Reid, look at your course. You've drawn a giant whale. And I looked, and I did, because when I went up above the equator, I drifted in the current this way, and I said, I don't want to drift anymore that way, so I sailed across here, and then I drifted this way. So I drew the tail, I drew the body. It looked just like a sperm whale. And I said, wow, if I change course now, I can draw the flipper and slim the body down. So I got ready, I tacked the boat through the wind, boom, got the wind on the other sails, and I started sailing down the flipper to the body. I knew I had about 5 days I had to sail on that course till I got the body, and then I was going to turn up. And by that time, I felt like, I know I'm going to make it, because I've been given this gift from the universe of the giant whale that I've drawn, and the whales are speaking to me. And I was a little worried before that, but then after that, I knew that I was blessed. I knew that I was going to make it, and I set course for Cape Horn and sailed around Cape Horn. And I know everyone's heard of Joshua Slocum, because he's really the grandfather of men who want to go on boats at sea for their own pleasure, for their own adventure, their own challenge. And he's the one who really started it with sailing around the world alone. And in the appendix of his book, he says, this is how I sailed my boat. He had a gaff rig cutter. I had a gaff rig schooner. But he said, I put my mainsail out all the way, laid it on the rigging, and I bowsed my staysail in the middle of the boat. So that's what I did. I bowsed my staysail in the middle of the boat, let the foresail out all the way, and then I had a downwind running rig that held a course perfectly through gale or through any kind of weather, and that's how I sailed the Southern Ocean, with the boat rigged like that. Well, when I turned up into the South Atlantic Ocean, I remember in the beginning of the voyage that I wanted to draw a heart. I didn't really get to do that. But this time, when I started getting to the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, I said, I'm going to try to draw that heart. I'm not going to tell anyone in case I mess up. But I actually drew a very perfect heart in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And I said, that's the way I show my love to the world. And I said, well, but I'm tired. I've been at sea for well over 2 years, rocking and rolling constantly. I didn't know if the human body could handle that. My arms were sore and tired. Lots of sail sewing, lots of ropes to pull all the time. When I'm sailing by myself on a gaff rig boat, day and night, even crossing the trade winds, which is incredibly beautiful, I counted the waves for a minute at a time, over and over again on different days, and it amounts to riding 31,000 waves a day come. So I'm getting rocked and rolled by 31,000 waves a day, and I said, I got to go somewhere where I'm not getting rocked and rolled, where I'm not going to be cast into a hurricane season or cast into a North Atlantic winter gale. And I looked at the wind and current on the top of the Atlantic, which runs clockwise, and the South Atlantic, which runs counterclockwise. And I said, those two wind and currents, they meet in the doldrums there below the Cabo Verde Islands off the coast of Africa. And if I go to that spot, I can get out of the wind and the waves. And that was what I did. I sailed up to that spot. And then I said, oh boy, this is so beautiful. Look at these tuna. They're the size of cows. And I was eating mahi-mahi every day. I was fishing. As soon as I caught a fish, I'd dry it. So I was eating fish the whole time. Cipriani's is a very fancy food chain in New York City. They sponsored me with food for the voyage. So I was actually eating gourmet food the whole voyage. And the key to my diet was sprouts. Every kind of sprout I was growing. So I had big sprout salads. Mung beans turned out to be the best. They grew to be big sprouts, and they're the only sprout that lasted 3 years and kept sprouting for me. So I was eating delicious food, and I took my mainsail down and my jib, and I let the wind blow me where it would. And when it blew me way across, I thought, no, now I'm getting out of this Shangri-La of the sea. So I hoisted the main back up and I sailed back over to where I started from the beginning. And then I drifted across again for a month or more. And then I did it a couple times, and finally I said, let me just see what happens if I don't sail back there. But I went a little further, but then I got in another countercurrent that took me back. So for almost 9 months, I didn't, set a course. I put a canvas over my compass. It was so hard to do that, you wouldn't believe it, because I wanted to peek under that canvas and see which way I was facing when the wind was blowing. You try it sometime when you're on a boat at sea. It's impossible to do that. But I was used to it. I let the wind blow me this way and blow me that way and blow me that way, and it was pure ecstasy for me. I knew I was doing the Mars-Ocean analog, the Mars-Ocean Odyssey. I was trying to communicate with space people. I wasn't getting much movement there. But I knew that I was leading the way for humanity into the type of thought that you would have to have if you're going to sit in a spaceship for 3 years. So I never lost touch with what was my goal there. And I had a wonderful trip. I stayed in touch with everyone, and I sailed back. I picked the day in advance that I sailed back. I went 1,152 days. I didn't want to go 1,000 days and arrive back to New York in January because the boat was worn out. I had huge chain plates. You could see where the chain plates were getting worn out, and the turnbuckles, the rigging, the sails were all worn out. So I wanted to sail back on a nice summer day, and I sailed back on June the 17th, the day that I said I would. And there was the press and my parents and family, and I sailed up right by the dock, and then I lowered my sails and I sailed up to the dock on the rising tide, the Circle Lines in Midtown Manhattan. And when I hit the dock and put her in neutral and I looked up, I really had this vision where I saw hundreds of eyes looking at me, just glittering eyes. And in that moment, I recognized everyone, all my old friends who helped me build the boat 40 years earlier. And I had a supervision, and I shouted out. The first thing I said to a human in 846 days was, I see a lot of people I love. And I was back. And so, and I was reunited with my girlfriend and son. And my dad had Alzheimer's, and Mom died by an accident in the hospital. She caught an infection. So I said, okay, I'm going to go home and take care of my dad now. So I laid the boat up in Wilmington, North Carolina, and went to Greensboro and took care of my dad for the last 8 years of his life. It was very satisfying. And towards the end of that, Elon Musk announced, I was always following this, but he announced he's sending humans to Mars in a few years. And I said, well, who are those people? I prepared for 20 years to do the 1,000-day voyage. Who are they preparing to go to Mars? And I went back to all my space connections, because I've been into long-duration space psychology since the mid-'80s, when it began with the very first people who invented Mars analogs and who started long-duration space psychology. And I published my first article in the National Space Magazine in 1990 titled, Seafarers of Today Provide a Role Model for Spacefarers of Tomorrow. And I said, who's he going to send? No one's in training. No one's tough enough. No one can cut themselves off from the earth. That means you have to have a mind that you can control and stop thinking about all the things that you have to think about on the earth and tune into where you are on the ocean and the sea. And maybe some of you have experienced that when you've been out at sea, because you have to do it when you're out there in a small boat. You have to pay attention to the sea and do what the sea tells you to do and adapt to it. And it's going to be the same way to go into space. Now, okay, so John flipped it to show you, there's the whale that I drew off of South America, and that's the actual GPS tracking of the heart. So that's the way the heart looked on my 2 courses that I drew at sea. And I will say that if you tap into your larger self and realize that you are capable of being a larger self than your small little person with your ego who has a limited time on earth, you tap into your larger self by becoming mythological, by becoming mythical, by believing those great stories and identifying with them. There's a lot of ways to become more of a human than you are when those opportunities arrive, and that's what these things do for me. Let's see what we've got. Okay, fine. There we go. Okay, so that's right on the subject. So I have a Mars manual, what Mars astronauts should do if they're going to have a proper time going to Mars. And one of the chapters has self-empowerment, but I say very clearly, you want to tap into your artistic self, your creative self, and you also want to dance. You want to dance and stay healthy, and when you dance, you have visions and you see things. And I started dragon dancing back in the early 80s. I put on a dragon mask and paint my body and dance naked on my boat. And I tell you, I had visions that no captain has ever had before, because there isn't a captain who navigated with a sextant who put on a dragon mask and danced naked. So I got ideas and I got visions, and it made me into the person who could do the longest sea voyage in history. This painting over here is a portrait of me. It's life-size. It's done by Jean-Michel Basquiat, who is America's most high-selling artist. Jean-Michel Basquiat, his paintings sell for $100 million. He's like the guy who invented street art, and he was embraced by the art world, and he's an amazing person. And I'm an artist. I've been in New York City many years when I'm not on the sea. He became my friend, and he painted that portrait of me, and people might wonder why. Well, I know that when he met me, he knew I had something special, and that was from my voyaging at sea, and that's why he painted that picture of me and gave it to me. I sold that to finance my voyage back in the early 90s. If I hadn't sold it, it would be worth millions of dollars right now, but I don't regret it, because by the time I left on that voyage, I had nothing behind me. My bank account was empty, so I had no attachments back on Earth to fall back to. Nothing that caught my mind and kept me thinking, oh, this is too tough, I'm going to give up and I'm going to go back because I got a painting worth $1 million, worth many millions of dollars. I can live a high life. No, everything was gone. My thought was at one with where I was. And I think the people who go to Mars are going to have to do that. And I think that what stops most people from becoming the sailor that they dream of being is their first physical fear of their body, and second, the fear of what will happen to their finances that they need to retire on. So if you want to go to sea and keep going, you have to let everything go on land that stops your mind thinking of that. And I say for the people who go to Mars, they're going to have to be the same way too. And this is a giant painting on sails. So I paint on my sails while I'm sailing. So every time I tear a sail, I go, yay, that's going to be a great painting. And I get more sails. All the sails on my boat are given to me from other boats, and I recut them for my great big schooner. I have a very fast style of sewing and cutting, and I can keep repairing these sails and keep going. I like new sails. I'm in a fundraising thing for them now, my course. And here we are in New York City sailing last fall, before we did a Mars analog in November off of New York City, and before I set off for the Caribbean last December the 20th in 16-degree weather. And it snowed a foot on the deck the day before we left, and I'm going, wow. But you know, the Windy app I'd already learned is so incredibly accurate that I trusted it. Windy app, if you want to know the weather of what's going to be like out at sea. And it gave us 5 days of northwest winds under 20 knots. And I said, well, geez, I can be 400 or 500 miles south if we leave in this window and be out of the worst of what the storms could offer me in the North Atlantic. And that's what we did. And we sailed out of there and sailed down to St. Thomas with an analog astronaut crew. And here's a couple more paintings. I wish I could show them to you large, because I use my charts that I plot my courses on, and I glue my charts into my paintings, and I paint on them. I paint on all my charts. I got back to New York City one time. I had painted on it so much that I couldn't see the buoys well enough, and I was going, oh my goodness, where's the buoys? I painted over them. So I paint on my charts and my sails at sea, and to me that really helps me a lot. It brings me in touch with a different part of me so that I'm getting a big picture of things. And here, this picture is from our show in the planetarium, where the planetarium is teaching people while I'm at sea that the boat is like a spaceship, and that we're flying above the space station. It's our view from above. So when I gave my last speech at the Mars Society conference, I showed this painting, and I said, I'm only going to show you this painting because I want you to look at this painting because I want you to understand what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is after I spend a lifetime at sea, have you ever been at sea and looked at the birds? You look at the birds for a while, and pretty soon you're flying with them. And I love those birds, the big white ones that fly, and the frigate birds the most. They fly the highest. And suddenly I'm looking down on the frigate birds, and I'm looking down at my boat below, and I'm holding that view. And I'm flying out of my body, and I'm realizing that I have an eternal flying spirit that's larger than my small self. And with that, you overcome fear for your body, and you come into touch with greater things that give you a greater understanding of the universe and a greater understanding of the sea. And that's how I did the Mars Ocean Analog. And they have a thing for it in space. They call it the overview effect. And every time an astronaut goes up into space, he goes, oh my God, I see the Earth down there. And I see how we're all one. And this is the biggest moment in my life. And I'm going, geez, I wish they'd teach them about that stuff before they go, so that when they got up there and they saw that, they could elevate off of that to learn higher things, the things that I learned to do what I did staying over 3 years at sea. And so here's a picture of us with our analog crews. This was the winter crew leaving New York City. This crew here was here in Palm Beach with me when I was here in 2021. And here we are in SpaceX, Texas, with the Starship behind us, with the Latino astronaut crew, and a picture of one of the ladies on the boat having a great time, and us in New York before departing New York. So you know, analog astronauts, when they go to the Mars Desert Research Station or the High Seas Habitat in Hawaii, their favorite thing is always dressing up in flight suits. And you have to sort of pretend you're an astronaut. That's all part of putting yourself in a state of mind to say, now I'm learning about what it will take to go to Mars. So we wear our uniforms for our photo shots and so forth. And so my story has always interested the the press. And you can see we got the Palm Beach Post last time, and the TV, and the London Times endorsed us. We were on the Space Show. Different magazines they've all been doing our story. It's kind of an interesting story. Before Elon Musk said he was going to go to Mars, maybe 6 years ago, the press mocked me in various ways for saying seafarers of today provide a role model for spacefarers of tomorrow. Now they get it, and they understand more what I'm doing, so I've been getting great stories in the press. And so here's more of us. We have our Mars banner that we fly when we're on our mission. This was our November winter solstice expedition, and it was freezing cold, and we were like spacemen out there doing our mission. And here's my partner Maxine with me, and she's in New York City. And I'll tell you today, she had a meeting with some space investors that hooked us up with an ambassador from a country that loved our story and is talking about trying to bring our program there. So it's secret right now. I can't talk about it, but that happened today. So we're working on trying to get sponsored and get our program officially going in a bigger way with education programs and getting more analog astronauts. And we need to be sponsored because I can't afford to keep this boat up. It's too much for me. I should be a rich man to have a boat that big, except I'm a super MacGyver, and I can keep fixing everything, and I keep fixing patches and repairs, and I keep the boat going, and we have incredible sales. Next. Okay, so then there's Maxine And instead of breaking down and saying, like other analog astronauts do, we get becalmed and they say, oh, geez, we're going to be late coming in. So they lose the headspace. We got becalmed and Maxine embraced it. And she went out into the blue and led the way out into the blue. And we're showing how much that action is like the iconic picture of men floating in space. And took a lot of bravery and vision to do that and get that big, good picture that she did. Okay, and then we were in SpaceX. We made our pilgrimage to SpaceX. Want to go to Elon and say, your technology is incredible, but who are the humans that are going to go? What is their experience? There's no astronaut that's been more than a year at space. So who are going to be the people? What is going to be their capability to stay in space for a couple of years? And they don't have anyone who's been in space more than a year. So we were trying to get SpaceX to help sponsor us. And that's our second pilgrimage to SpaceX. And here in this picture, we're getting ready to depart Starbase for the last mission we did across the Gulf and here to Palm Beach. And I want to introduce Jack Ewan. Come up, Jack, because Jack is in the picture. And he's actually flying a drone at this moment that took the picture.
White Buick is in my parking spot for my boat. Who's got a white Buick? Can you move it, please? Thanks. Sorry about that.
Okay. So Jack is flying a drone here. Jack's family has a ranch next to SpaceX down on the Mexican border, and they're involved in all kinds of space stuff. Jack turned out, never been sailing before, but turned out to be a genius on the boat with everything, and almost the best crew member I've ever had. And I'm going to let him talk just for a few minutes about his experience out there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jackson Ewan. I'm 22, and this was actually my first time at sea on pretty much any vessel for longer than a boat charter or anything like that. So this was quite a surprise. It was 21 days, and we sailed across the Gulf of Mexico, America, whichever you guys prefer. But yeah, it was quite a wild ride. We had currents and wind against us, and Reid was a good teacher, and we had plenty of time to listen to all the different stories, and they're wild stories. This was just the tip of the iceberg today. But yeah, our family's been down by SpaceX for the past 4 years. And yeah, it was quite an honor to sail with Reid. And a little bit about myself is that, being on this boat for 21 days was a different experience than I've ever experienced before ever in my life. Being in close quarters with an additional 3 people or 4 people for 21 days is quite an experience. And Reid is a very, I would say, maybe a way to describe it is a sailing purist. Right? There's no autopilot on the ship. Right? There's no digital LCD screen with the GPS showing you live and everything. He navigates the compass, telltales, and and now he's been introduced to the app Windy, so we kind of corrupted him this trip. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience being able to sail a very long distance in a very analog manner, in the same way that perhaps people sailed about during the founding of this country, right? And it really isolates the human experience in a way that you can't really replicate nowadays, I feel like. So yeah, I have to thank you for that. And our family, we also run a nonprofit, and we see a lot of people come through in our teams throughout the years. And I have to say, in 21 days, we've been able to condense maybe, let's say, a year or more worth of analyzing human behavior within an organization. We've been able to see that within half the duration of this voyage and how to overcome that. So it was quite a rich experience, and I have Reid to thank for that. So thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, Jack was an incredible crew member in every way. I could say what makes an incredible crew member is someone who pays attention and who's present all the time, who's so polite that it's unbelievable, and so helpful on everything, and has the energy to help out with everything, and even stick with me after we arrived here to make sure that everything was good before he left for us to set off on our next mission, which is June the 3rd for New York City. So we've got some analog astronauts that are coming with us, and anyone who is so moved and so fit and capable and wants to come should talk to me and tell me about it, and we'll see what happens. So what's next?
Questions.
Okay, that's it.
Questions.
Yeah, okay, questions. Yes.
Do you have any other battery batteries or generators?
Your question was, how do we supply power to the boat? Yeah. Okay. We have a Honda generator, and we have solar panels. On my 1,000-day voyage, I used only solar panels, and and we have our big Detroit, which runs and charges the batteries with the alternator, and that gives us the power for the boat. We'd like to have a wind generator, but gaff riggers aren't like these Bermudan boats that have a backstay, and they can all mount their generators on the back of the backstay and their solar panels there. But our boom hangs over the back, and we don't have a good place to mount a wind generator. We'd like to do that. So we use the Honda generator, the alternator on the diesel motor, and solar panels to supply our power during the voyage. Yes.
So,
What's that?
I said you look like you can clear the Brooklyn Bridge pretty well. I got the other story. Go up here. Are you able to go under the intercoastal bridges? Is that?
Yes. Because we heard about the. He wonders if I can go under the coastal bridges, and yes, I can. My master not that tall. You see, my master's 60 feet, so I can go under quite a number of waterway bridges. But I know my limitations, and I would be careful not to go in places where I couldn't go under the bridges.
One more question for you. Construction technique. Steel and vinyl ester over the bus. Is that correct? Steel and vinyl ester?
Steel and polyester, fiberglass. Yes.
Have you, in the 50 years, have you had any problem with corrosion of the steel, rusting of the steel in the vinyl ester? Was it stainless steel?
No, it was all mild steel and spring steel, and it was all plastered and smothered with fiberglass. And we've had a few little problems, but not much. We would chip out the crack and epoxy it in and put some mat over it, and the boat is in good shape, especially the bottom, because it's not in the sun and it doesn't get crashed against the docks sometimes. So the side of the boat has gotten crashed against docks a couple times, and we've had to put more mat on to protect it and take care of it. But it's a real good boat, lasting real well.
Two questions. What kind of music did you listen to, and what was the most dangerous thing that happened during your trip?
Okay, so John asked, what kind of music do we listen to? And well, we listen to all kinds of music, and oftentimes not so much music at all. And in my life, I've listened to everything. It winds up that I like listening to newer music now, things that I haven't heard before. So I like pop remixes where they throw a couple songs together that are popular and mix it up and slow it down. Then it sounds like something I've never heard before, and it's pretty nice. So that's currently my favorite. And the other question?
What was the most dangerous thing you encountered during your 3 years at sea?
The most dangerous thing I encountered during my 3 years was, well, you have the long-term things, like, how dangerous is it to be alone at sea for 3 years? You could have anything happen to your body. That's what you could create with your mind or something like that. So there's a slow danger. But the biggest danger that happened to me is the boat was capsized and turned upside down off of Cape Horn. And because it has a 10-foot keel with 42,000 pounds of junkyard steel in the bottom of it, the boat automatically rights